Okay, hello. So I'm super excited to show you what I've been working on the last few days. It started with a project where I got an idea related to Tailwind CSS. And Tailwind CSS is a design system and a library where you build up your app using class names. Like design systems are usually implemented as like values you use with, for example, style components or whatever, or like theming and stuff. But this is different. It abstracts it up to class names, which is actually a really good idea. Now, Tailwind CSS seems to be very focused on like HTML in general. I don't think they come from like a React background. It's not JavaScripty at all. It's basically a configuration where it produces a bunch of CSS and then you just use it. And then they have some kind of language, I don't know if it's Sass or less or whatever, and you can compose things and create new things and stuff. Though I don't think like that. I'm used to like React and style components and stuff. And I like the flexibility to be more dynamic with things in my code because we build super dynamic applications, and it's a big benefit to have all that stuff. Anyways, I created this project using Tailwind CSS where you have like a JavaScript/TypeScript API to consume it, and you get typing, which means you get discoverability, searchability of all the classes and everything. And people really liked it. I got a lot of feedback on it, and I knew I was like onto something. But this was like very built on top of Tailwind CSS. So then I got this other idea, and I recruited this guy called Fabrice. He's been helping out a lot with Overmind, and we have had a lot of fun with this project. It's not 100% complete yet, but very, very soon. And yeah, we've been throwing code back and forth, and it's just been one of my best experiences in open source. So that's a lot of fun. He's a really smart guy, knows a ton of TypeScript, likes to work on low level stuff. Like this project I'm going to talk about is a Babel plugin, which requires you to understand abstract syntax trees and stuff. So he's really good at that. And generally just a really nice guy. Okay, so what we are going to talk about, let me make sure I have the latest version here. It's this new project called CLASSYUI. It's not been published on NPM yet, but it will be very, very shortly. And what it is a typed configurable design system with no runtime. So basically, it's inspired by Tailwind CSS, but it's not using any of it. Where this project differentiates from Tailwind CSS is that it's actually able to automatically detect what classes you're trying to access. So it's not like you configure what classes you want to use. You just start using the project, and it will figure out by itself what you're actually using. And that's not only the classes, that's all the variations of the classes. And everything's typed, which again means that you can explore and search and stuff. And even if you're not using TypeScript, you will actually get this, especially if you're using VS Code. You will be able to search the class names directly in your code. Yes, so the benefits, yeah, you get typed usage of class names from the design system, blah, blah, blah. It lazily creates the class names and the pseudo selectors and everything based on the actual consumption in the app. You can compose class names together into variables and stuff, because it's JavaScript. And you can use dynamic assignment of class names. Like this is the dynamic part of apps I'm talking about. We don't always want a static set of class names. We want to change them out depending on the state of the app. In production, it automatically optimizes all the CSS class names, and even the dynamic assignment, it just makes code that you could never write yourself, or you would have to be very particular. And that CSS file in production is actually automatically imported in your code, which means that if you have like a toolchain that's managing CSS, optimizing it, maybe post CSS or something, this file will actually be picked up by that. So we don't do that. We are about figuring out what class names or what CSS should we produce based on the code you have written. So in production, the runtime completely disappears. So it doesn't affect your bundle size at all, except, of course, you have an extra CSS file with some CSS. But the cool thing is, like, we can even shorten the names of everything because we control everything. So it's like super, super optimized. It also supports themes, and it automatically figures out what values in the configuration are also in your themes, which means it converts it into CSS variables. So it optimally flips out the themes. Okay, so how do we use it? It's a bubble plugin. So basically you just install the CLASSYUI library, and then you add the plugin and you start using it. If you're using Create React App or for some reason need to use macros, you can do that instead. Okay, so I thought maybe, let's see here, we could just start writing some code, and then we're going to look into how this actually works. Okay, so I have a project here now. Hello world. There's nothing in here now, no CSS. So what we're going to do is basically give this header a color. So we say, and of course I'm using React here because I'm a React developer. But as we will see later in the documentation, you can use, of course, use Vue and Angular and whatever. So we have this thing called class names, and this is the composition tool. This is like the core tool you use to find your class names and compose them together. So I want the color to be red 500. So when I save this now, it updates. And we can see that it has added a class of color red 500, and it also became red. So let's have a look in the head here. We can see that we have a style tag, and we can see the CSS it created. So we have the color red here, which has become a variable. You know what? Let's do that later. Let's choose another color. So what we have here now is the color red has been added, and it's just a color. It's related to theming. I want to go into that later. By the way, if we discover any bugs here, like it might happen, it's not done yet, just so that you're warned. Anyways, so based on using this code here, we got some styling into our code. So what we can do here now is we can choose to, maybe we can compose it a bit. So let's create header, and let's move it up here. So call it header, and we want to add some more class names here. Let's give it like a background color gray, something like that. Cool. And maybe we can also give it some padding. Padding 10, something like that. And we can also give it a radius, let's see, border radius, medium, for example, I don't know, something like that. Okay, so now you see how you would compose together different class names. And what we can also do here is add what we call decorators, and decorators kind of decorates the class names. So let's just take a look at an example. Let's use hover. Okay, so when I hover this, I want to make the color stronger red, for example. So let's save that now. When I hover it, well, not stronger red, but a different shade of red. And what we can see here now is that the style tag has now produced color red 600, which is this one. It has produced a CSS for our background, the padding, our border radius, and it has added a hover for our header. So that's its own class name. Okay, cool. So what we can go ahead and do now is so there are different decorators. You have hover, you have first child, disabled, focused, and lots of different stuff. But we also have something called, let's see, maybe we can change the background. So we have decorators called screen decorators. So these screen decorators is based on the config, and by default you have like small, medium, large, and extra large, and those are breakpoints. So you will have a default configuration, which is, for example, MD. And when we let's keep that color, but when we are on a lower breakpoint, let's use a different gray. So if I change this now, oh, that was very bright, 200. Yeah, you see that? So that was based on the breakpoint. It changes out the class name automatically. Now the really cool thing is that in your config, as we will see in the docs later, is that you can define your own screens. So by default you have small, medium, large, extra large, which exposes these functions, and they're typed, as you can see. But you can choose like mobile, tablet, desktop, and then you rather use those functions, and those are also typed. So the library automatically creates the types based on your configuration, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so let's do something a bit more complicated. We are going to use a new decorator called group. So let's just import that. And that makes this element a group, which means that if I go in here now and I say class name, let's just add teal 500. Hello there. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do now is say that we want this to be teal 500. And if we happen to hover the group, let's, is it called hover group? Oh, is it group hover? Group hover, sorry. We want this to be white, for example. So that means when we, oh, white was not good. Let's do black. Okay, so now it's teal, but if I hover like the div here, it becomes black. So that means that you can actually separate out, this is just like Tailwind CSS does it, but we do it in JavaScript. So you can define a group, and then you can add behavior to the child elements based on what is happening on the group element. So for example, if you're hovering the group, if the group is the first child, if it's focused, for example, you can do all sorts of stuff, just like you can do with the plain elements. Okay. So let us now talk about theming, because this is also interesting how theming works. So in my CLASSYUI config, I create a theme called dark, which overrides the color red 500, which is green. So what we're going to do is create our dark theme. And we do that by simply calling the theme function. And this is also typed. It understands that I have a theme called dark. And then we can go in here and we can start composing group with our theme. And we're actually going to use an object this time because we want to dynamically set the theme. So we want to set dark, and we'll just set it to true now. Let's try this theme dark. Okay, cool. Let's just do that. I need to fix that. Sorry about that. So we rather added the dark theme directly to our main element. So let's just try without it first to see how it looks. So we have our hello world with our color red 500. And when I now add the theme, it suddenly became green. And that is because our configuration has a green color. So how does it actually do this? Let's have a look at the style. Okay, so we have our color red, but as you can see, this has suddenly become a variable because it's defined in our config that this is a variable. And then it adds the dark theme, and it says that the color red 500 is green. So that means whenever themes dark is added, it changes this variable to green. And then we have our other CSS as well. As we can see, we have the media query with our screen decorator and all the other stuff. Anyways, so this is basically just a quick demo of how it works. Let's just read a little bit of the documentation so that you kind of like get an idea of how you would kind of like build an app with this. So as we can see with React, we had like a pretty good example now how you would use it, but now we just inlined it, we put it like in a variable outside the component, but you would probably like create a styles file maybe, where you would kind of like style components. You have like your own file where you export all the class names, or maybe you put it above the component. It doesn't matter. In Vue, you would most likely create the class names on the component itself, and then you would consume it in the template. And the same for Angular. You define them on the component, and then you would consume them in the app. And again, maybe you want to create them as variables above the component in its own file, doesn't matter. And then we have the core function, class names, that we looked at, where you saw how it worked. You compose together class names. You have an option to use an object. It didn't quite work with the theme. I have to fix that. But basically you also get auto completion here, and you would then use a variable to figure out if it should be available or not. And then you can actually compose one set of class names with another set of class names. So here we can see we create a button, and then we want to create an alert button. So it composes the button with the other stuff. And then you can also dynamically compose. So for example, you would be able to maybe just have a general alert class, and then you could compose that into the button dynamically if you wanted to do that. So many options there. So then we have our decorators. So decorators can be composed inside each other. So you can give hover and first child to a class, for example, which means that the color red 500, that color would activate if you would hover an element with this class that is the first child. So you have hover, disabled, focused, active, visited, first child, last child, odd child, even child, focus within, and then you have the screen decorators. As you saw in the demo, we imported MD, and now only color red 500 is active up to the breakpoint of by default 768 pixels. But as I mentioned, you can change out these screens. So in this example, we have a tablet, and that is something you would define in your config. So you would override the screens and set your own properties with their own values. And then we have group decorators, where we saw that we had the group for the parent, and then whatever children of that element can then use like group hover, group focus, group active, and so on to trigger its class name based on the interaction on the parent. Not interaction, but you know, the state or the pseudo state. So we also have the theme decorator. As you saw, it's supposed to be possible to just set it and then use it dynamically inside class names. Oh, seems like there's a typo here. Fix that as well. So that works just fine. And then you also have the possibility, since we're using JavaScript, you can create factories. So you don't only necessarily create like a composition of class names, but you even do the whole thing dynamic. So you rather create a function where you pass in arguments, and then you compose together a set of class names based on that argument or a set of arguments. So it's like a really, really powerful tool. And then we have the custom config. It has a bunch of properties, and all this is taken straight from Tailwind CSS. Like Fabrice and I aren't designers, we don't know design systems that well, so we wanted to use a proven concept. And Tailwind CSS is a really good example of that. So it's structured by category and label. That's what we call it. And then we have like, how does this actually work? So these set of properties, they map to actual CSS properties, as you can see here. So the way you think about this is that you use CSS properties, you think about them and you search for them. Unlike Tailwind CSS, which have their own names for things, which I don't think personally is a good thing. I think they do it because you have to inline so much so many class names, while here you use code, so you can structure and order things more easily, which means that it doesn't matter if you say background color instead of BG color, for example. And it also makes it easier for you to think about it, because it is actually CSS properties. But anyways, so let's imagine that you're looking for border top width. That's what you're going to mess around with in the property of your configuration, which by default looks like this. It has a default 0248 property with different values. So when you try to find border top width in your code, it will actually come up with these class names. Border top width default 0248, which represents these values. So basically that's how it works. And yeah, so here we have an example of a configuration. You can override the whole property, or you can use a function to compose in the existing value of that property, add new stuff. You can even kind of like create variables to existing values. And you can also use a function which returns a function which gives you access to all the different properties of the config. Anyways, themes, you just define them, override whatever values you want. So you don't replace anything here, you just override the specific values. Yes. So I have talked about a little bit how this works. So basically in development, it replaces your code on the fly with the actual CSS required for that CSS name you're asking for. So it's kind of like the plugin is kind of like an API. You're kind of like calling the plugin, and it returns the CSS for that class name if it hasn't already been added. And then there's a tiny runtime during the development that puts that CSS into a style element. So you get like a really good development experience. And then in production, it does the exact same analysis, but instead of providing back the CSS, it just removes everything in the code, and then it adds that CSS to a CSS file, which will be imported in your code, which means it becomes part of your build tool. And if that build tool picks up CSS files and optimizes them, it will also optimize this file. Yes, that was a lot of information. I hope I got the idea through here. Like the power of this is that you get like this design system for free. So you're super productive and very consistent with everything you're doing. And you don't have to think about how it affects your bundle size or anything like that. It just optimizes everything out of the box, which is really, really interesting. And like if you don't like it, please take away this concept of having a plugin as like an API. Like you can use the plugin to analyze the code, which actually calls the plugin, and then the plugin can return stuff. It's like a mental image of that. It's kind of cool, and I think you can do a lot of cool stuff with that. Yes. That's it for now. I hope you like it. We will put it on NPM very shortly, so you can test it out. And we'll probably run a release candidate first to get some feedback. But yeah, hope you like it. Bye bye.